Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. We got three different nice tops on this morning. We got white, gray, and blue. GT's got the beard back. He's got the flex back. And more importantly, GT's got the chip. Congratulations, my guy.
Yeah, it was a good tournament, great opponents, really good experience at the Multi-Division National Duels. It's never expected and always earned to go to that tournament and then find out what you have. So it was a good time. The kids stepped up and wrestled very well. So it was really, really cool to be a part of that.
And let's talk big picture, and then I want to come back to NAIA duels because I think NAIA duels are so much different than the tournament for a variety of reasons because of how you guys are allowed to wrestle at nationals. But congratulations to the NAIA women's champion, the NWCA women's champion, the D3 champs, the D2 champs, and the NAIA champs. And you mentioned this last year, but it's probably worth mentioning at least once a year. The folks at Louisville do a great job putting that together, right, Grant?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've been at Louisville here for a few years and, they put on a good production. They have all of it, like kids and, they have an open tournament and things of that nature for some of the other athletes to compete in as the tournament is going on. Huge shout out to the people that, the top 16 teams in all of the divisions that qualified and being a part of it. It's a really cool place to be, to watch a lot of really good wrestling.
Yeah, and again, I think most people know this, but NAIA sent 12 athletes to nationals, not 10, and you can double up at 6 weights theoretically. You could, go the first 6, the last 6, any sprinkling of. So to have a great NAIA tournament team, you do not have to have a great dual meet team. Not saying it's like that's the goal, but you could just be doubled up and literally have 4 weights where you're terrible and probably crush it at nationals. Dual meets, we say it on this podcast probably once a month. Your worst athletes really decide if you win, and tournaments, the best athletes decide who wins. So credit to Grandview and St. Cloud and all these other schools that have balance, that have good athletes spread out. Mark, you had great dual meet teams at Iowa Central. I know you and I were talking about these multinational duels over the weekend because the non-Division I wrestling is really, near and dear to our hearts. We sent a bunch of kids to those institutions. We competed against a bunch of those institutions. So as a team that was at that level, how much fun was it to watch, and how impressed are you by the level of non-Division I wrestling?
I always thought it was important to bond as a team, and that's what the duels did, because you're cheering for your, teammates. D1 or the national tournament is more of an individual tournament. Sure, you want your teammates to do well, but you've got to be really focused on yourself, what you need to do. I was going to ask you, Grant, when you walk through a tournament like this, pretty much unscathed, you pretty much dominated from beginning to end. How do you focus with your kids to say, hey, this was one weekend. You guys wrestled great. But the big weekends in March, or for some teams, end of February, but mostly in March for the national tournament. How do you keep those kids thinking, okay, you had a good tournament, but you're not the greatest there is. You can still get beat. What do you guys do there at Grandview? Because you obviously are a step ahead of everybody else with all the national titles, national team titles. What do you guys do with the kids to get them prepared now for nationals after walking through the national duels? A lot of teams would think that there's, no competition. I don't have to worry about it.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I think probably a lot of, very, very, very intelligent coaches and people that are at all of the divisions basically have the same kind of mantra where it's like, hey, hey, this is a good duel. This is a good tournament. Now we're back to work, so like we got stuff to work on. Nobody wrestled perfect here. You all have stuff to work on. If it's not shape, it's technique. If it's not technique, it's shape or mental training or, your shot defense, whatever it is. you got stuff to work on. And if you don't think that you have anything to work on, you're wrong. So, it's always a good measuring stick because it is a national tournament. So you do get to go up against really good competition, and all the people that participate in this event are good. It's the top teams in the nation in your division. So it's, once again, you're going up against their best guys, their top travel team, their dual team. And once again, like, there's stuff to work on always. And I don't think in the sport of wrestling, you ever really arrive at the top of the mountain. Like, there's always another peak you can climb. There's always something that you can do better and do better, in your preparation, your weight cutting, your meal prep, whatever it is that you want to be able to execute. So you can find something to focus on to get you through to the individual national title, which is still a team title. And you want to have all your boys do well or girls do well. So,
sure.
It's even cooler when you have the tight races, specifically like in, I believe, the women's collegiate club and the women's NAI national finals. Everything came down to the last match.
Yeah.
And I believe that King University wrestled the entire tournament without a heavyweight. So they're already starting down 5, and they ended up winning a title. So it's like, everybody else steps up if somebody goes down, right? So those are the cool moments as you work to develop towards the end of the year process. So there's always something to work on.
And if anybody's watching and thinks that Grant is wrong when he said 5, Grant is right. Just so people understand that, because I want to get that in there, because somebody will not give GT the credit he deserves in freestyle scoring. 5-0 for a pin. We've talked about just well done, GT, but it was so low key smart, like 10 rip to get it out there that you were on it. So, and that was a couple of the other things I wanted to point out was that I like Mark's comment a lot about bonding. I mean, I'm sure that's one of the things I miss about coaching, and it's also cool as a coach because you sit in one corner for an hour and a half, so you don't miss anybody's match. Like, you go to a big tournament a couple of years ago, we were at the Life U Open, GT, and you guys are all running around all over the place, which is just the nature of the beast.
Right.
But I also would encourage people to go back and rewatch, especially if you're a freestyle fan, go back and rewatch those women's semis and finals in both levels. Those are your superstars of tomorrow. A young lady like Diamond Guilford, who we just interviewed at the World Cup in Coralville, is now back wrestling on the college schedule. So a lot of us, I know a lot of people, like, they'll watch a fight in the UFC and like, that guy's on the come up or that young lady's on the come up. If you want to be the person that kind of knows who's coming up next, go back and watch, even if it's just semis and finals, you'll hit most of the good kids. I mean, certainly there's a kid who could be on a team who's not in the top 4, but and obviously we're a USA Wrestling podcast, and I've tried to do a better job of not just waiting until they're at the US Open to figure out if they're any good or not. Speaking of which, US Open, registration, hotels, all that stuff's opened up. Excuse me. And GT and Nike are there every year. If you've been there, you walk in at probably the biggest Nike booth I see all year is at the US Open. It's awesome. It's big when Shane makes an appearance. So it's a big tournament. And that tournament, again, if you love wrestling, is freaking awesome. So we'll get more to that. And just to jump ahead real quick, and we'll come back. I'm gonna make sure I try to pronounce this correctly. The Henri Deglaine tournament, GT, in France is next weekend. The Henri Deglaine Challenge, France, January 20 to 22. So we'll talk. We're recording this a day late on Friday. But next week will be the 19th, and we'll do a preview of that tournament. But America's sending a big contingent over there, a lot of our 1s and 2s and 3s. So something to keep an eye on if you're on the international track. I think today we'll spend most of our time on the domestic side, but want the people to be aware of that. So just a couple of, I guess, let's start with this. Northwestern and Minnesota wrestled double forfeit at 125. And we've talked about the medical forfeit stuff. I don't know if there's anything even to really talk about here, but I think wrestling has got to figure out a better way to get more matches and more of the better kids wrestling in the matches. Mark and I had a long conversation about this last week, so I won't repeat it, but that was, I guess, less than exciting. Let me see what else we have here. Sammy Alvarez hits the portal from Rutgers. Apparently there were some weight situations going on there. Want to give a shout out to Massi Odiotti from Loyola. He just committed to Northwestern. He's been in our event several times. And he's also one of the Loyola kids that Matt Collum coaches. Braden Thompson. So this was interesting.
This is getting out, David. This is getting out of hand.
Okay, well, we can
my
get
opinion.
I just want to make sure. Yeah, well, that's fine. We'll go there. I just want to make sure people understand. People are like, well, so-and-so broke the news first. We told everybody on the Hall of Fame duels play-by-play that Braden Thompson was coming. So everybody now is act like I knew it a month before that. Like I actually talked to his mom about wrestling in Oklahoma border brawl, and she goes, which side would he be on? I was like, what does that mean? And then she told me. So I think people need to understand, just because somebody doesn't say stuff out loud and doesn't put everybody else's business on the streets, we all hear things. I know Grant hears a number of things through Nike. And we both, Mark and I, hear our share of things through the wood, through the network, so to speak. So go ahead, Mark. You're upset that Braden Thompson is moving to the quiet suburbs of Stillwater, Oklahoma.
I'm not upset. It's just that these schools are bringing in these kids. I just don't understand it. Every state is different. I understand that. They all have their own rules. How a student can go in at semester and be eligible to wrestle in the state tournament, yet in Pennsylvania, you can transfer to another school and they shut your program down for 3 years. I mean,
okay, stop.
It doesn't. There's no difference, David. It's the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. I know firsthand what happened in Pennsylvania. So don't. All right. First of all, say out loud, these are only your opinions and not the opinions of USA Wrestling.
They are my opinions and nobody else's.
GT, you know where I was going, right? And,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about the individual state high school regulations for either transfers and or whatever it is, family situations where they move into a different school district, different club, whatever it may be, like scholastically, whatever it is, Iowa High School Athletic Association rule.
Yeah.
And I think because that's not uniform, maybe across the entire nation, because each state has different rules and regulations when it comes to certain things, moving in a semester or transferring school districts or whatever it may be, open enrollment, it leverage itself to wild things that happen. Like where you have people that move into a district and all of a sudden become eligible for the state tournament, come January 15th or whatever it is, when school starts back up. So I can understand Mark's getting riled up about it. And I can understand, like, because of where maybe an athlete goes and then they find a way to be able to get into that school district or get into that state and be able to compete there. And it's not even just in the sport of wrestling. I think it's in all sport categories. So it's like,
without a doubt.
Yeah.
And it's not just Oklahoma. It's
Correct.
not just Stillwater, obviously. It's Iowa City High. You've got kids that have transferred in from PA there. One of them did not wrestle because I don't think he was there. I think in Iowa, you have to be there for at least a year to compete at the state tournament.
I don't know for sure what that terminology would be, because it's all over the map and it's changed so many times. But to your point, absolutely. I think everything is different and all those situations are different. And once again, it's not just a Iowa thing or an Oklahoma thing or a Michigan thing or a Pennsylvania thing.
Yep.
Some of these, you're starting to see people gravitate towards specific programs, I think, all over the country, where it's like, hey, I really want to go wrestle for Dave Mirikitani. I want to go learn from Mark Ostrander at Iowa City High.
Yeah.
But, once again, there's always reasons behind the reasons. And we all know that there's other things at work other than just athletic opportunity. So,
yeah.
All right. So couple things. First of all, there's the rules and optics are very different of a kid that lives in state A, let's just say Alaska and moves from school A to school B within Alaska. That's different. Or switches public to private, private to public. I know about a lot of these rules because Cornell Robinson, who wrestled for me, was the coach at CBC here, and he walked me through a lot of those rules because he was at CBC is a private school, and then SEM's obviously a private school, obviously in Pennsylvania. Then there's the whole other thing of moving from state to state and whether you actually moved or whether like you just got a cousin down there. There's all these different rules. Okay. I will say this, like you talked about Iowa City. I had lunch with Gabe and Phil Arnold. I've known Phil forever. I know Gabe. Their family moved. They wanted to be near Gabe when he was wrestling in college. So they moved. So I also want to say this. I'm going to sort of talk on both sides of the street. The rules are designed to not punish a kid I can tell you this, the rules, the thought behind the rules are to not punish a kid whose family happens to move. Like if my dad gets a job and I move in the middle of the year, I was a 3-time state champion. If I had not had a chance to wrestle my senior year and nobody in large schools had done it at 20 years at the time, that'd have been heartbreaking. But we weren't even thinking about manipulating rules back then. Like, a Catholic school called me to wrestle there, and the coach talked to my mom, and my mom said, "We're not Catholic." And the coach goes, "It doesn't matter." And she goes, "It does to me." So that was the end of that conversation. So there's that. The other thing I can tell you for sure that there's a school in Missouri where 2 kids just put down an address in that district, and the district is supposed to check it. They never lived in that district. They never moved in that district. They don't have a family member in that district. And those 2 kids won 7 state titles at that school. So it's self-checking in a lot of these cases. And if nobody wants to be a rat and turn them in, like that, it's almost like the NCAA thing where the RTCs are not supposed to pay for room and board. Well, your backyard better be really, really clean before you turn anybody else in. So anyway, it's a news thing. My whole point of it was, I don't know who talked about it first, but this really wasn't a secret. And the other thing is this, and this is the part that people should understand. If kids move early, there are certain financial things that benefit you. If you become an in-state student, you get different tuition rates. If you're emancipated, you qualify for different financial aid, both at the school and within the state. So sometimes it just makes sense. Like, well, look, I can't really afford, I can afford to, but I don't want to spend the money. But if I emancipate my kid and they move, now I get a Pell Grant, which just jumped over $7,000 for next year. And in the state of Oklahoma, I get the Oklahoma grant. So there's just a bunch of things that move there, but we just want to make sure people knew we weren't asleep at the wheel and we knew about it. And we definitely wanted to get Mark fired up about it. So let's get into the rankings. Let me pull this up. We're going to share a tab. All right. 125. So I think the biggest story of the week here is the Spencer Lee match with Matt Ramos. I think most people saw it. I'll describe it, make sure I got it right, and you guys can react. Ramos takes Lee down. Lee gets away. Ramos lateral drops Lee for 6. He was not close. Well, I would say he was close. He was not pinned. There was no controversy, I don't think, on whether he was pinned or not. That makes it 8-1. Lee gets away. Spencer gets the takedown. I'm going to go first name Mark there. Gets on top, does Spencer Lee things on top and pins him. But like all in the first period, I believe. So it's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds, give or take. So Marco, you are the wise sage of this program. Does that show that Spencer Lee is vulnerable, or does that show you better kill him if you get him on his back because he's coming back? Or both?
I think everybody's vulnerable in college. Nobody's perfect. You're going to have matches where you don't feel great with an hour weigh-in. Ramos came out to wrestle. Ramos is dangerous. We talked about this early. he's pinned some kids at the national tournament when he was wrestling 133. He's a good sized 25-pounder, but he's also got a gas tank on him. He can go, and he's not afraid to hold back. He's going to let it fly when he's out there. So Spencer looked like he was just kind of walking through things at the beginning, and then once it was 8-1, I think you saw a different Spencer Lee. He opened up another gear, and he was able to do that. Now, people are saying, why didn't Ramos run a little bit and keep that lead, give up a few stall callings? If you've watched Ramos wrestle, that's not how he wrestles. He's going to go after you. And that's why it was fun to watch. So I don't really read into it other than it makes Ramos a contender in the top of the weight class, I think. Just my opinion, obviously, not the opinion of anybody on this podcast or USA Wrestling, but it's my opinion. I think that puts him up in that, top 4, right through 3, 4. Would it surprise me if he beat Patrick Glory on a 1-hour weigh-in? No way. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. But I think when you get Spencer in a position where you could pin him or, take him out of the match, you better finish it because he hadn't been on top yet, and we know how good he is on top.
Yeah. So the rankings here, they're a little misleading. Courtney's at 6 and Figueroa's at 8. So obviously Arizona State can only enter one guy here. So Heinzelman essentially would bump to 8. And in these cumulative rankings, Ramos would be 9. And then that would put him on the 1-8 line with Heinzelman, which means he'd have Spencer in the quarters. But it's easily to see where he can move down to 7 or down to 10 or up to 7 and be with Glory in the semis. And even if he had McKee, that's fascinating because they used to be on the same team at Minnesota. 33. So GT, I think I sent you a text when this happened, but you were just doing busy things like coaching national championship teams. But Sam Latona beat Vito. They started that duel at 57. So the duel ended up at 49, which was the Vito match with Caleb Henson. It was only 3-2, but I watched that duel, and Latona dominated the action. I certainly think Vito could win that match, but he took the vast majority of the shots, got to the legs numerous times, probably was in deep 4 or 5 times, and was only able to finish once. I hear that Vito's cutting hard from an opposing coach that was, at a 1-hour weigh-in, and they were like, we want to draw because they didn't want him to start. They don't want to start at 25.
Got it.
When you've seen Vito probably more than most people, especially on the freestyle circuit, because you're at all these events. I kind of thought he was a dark horse to threaten Dayton and RBY. Do you still think he is, and this is a blip, or do you think maybe he's more on the second tier? And what do we think of Latona?
Well, I think, for Vito, once again, the collegiate season, as well, you guys know, is ebbs and flows. These guys are college students, and they're not machines. They're not having the exact same outing every single time, right? So for whatever bad weight cut, flu, whatever it is, tests, grades, whatever it may be, guys can have interesting ebbs and flows in matches, right? So
right
when you have those guys that are like RBY or Fix at this specific weight class where they feel like they're automatic all the time, there's still stuff that goes on with weight cuts and how they feel and whatever. But I would say that at this weight class, just looking at how much talent there is here, you got to remember that Sam Latona was national, is the number 2 seed at the national tournament at 125 at one point in time.
Yes.
So these guys are not the degree of separation is not that great. You have Lucas Bird down there, who's an All-American, who's a monster for Illinois.
Right.
And Mickey Philippi has also beat Dayton Fix before in previous competition. So I think it's just a matter of how much do you believe in Sam Latona being able to do it consistently? I think Vito's proven to a lot of people that over his career, he's been able to consistently beat these guys. And also to bring up his match against McGee on Flow, he had to come all the way back and get that one.
Yeah, that was a great match. Really great match down at Flow. Yeah.
So,
And you're right. No, I'm sorry. Finish, please. Sorry.
no, I think that's, I mean, as all of those things are being said about, let's say Latona, hey, that's a great win for Latona.
Yes.
Build off of it, continue. Vito, hey man, it's a tough match. We'll get it back. So I think as those guys, and especially if he's cutting weight really hard, once again, we talked about that with Pat McKee last year. And we've talked to the University of Minnesota guys where they're, hey, like he finally figured out his weight. And then all of a sudden he's winning 38 matches on the backside in the past 2 national tournaments.
That's right. And pinning most of them. Yes.
Right.
So I think in my mind, I thought of RBY as 1A here, Fix as 1B. And I think in the beginning of the year, I had Vito as 1C. And I think Vito now has this bandwidth where on a good day, he could wrestle with Dayton and RBY. On a bad day, he could lose to Latona. And it's also interesting that this weight specifically because McGee has lost to Bird. Some of these guys are ranked differently based on bodies of work and not specific head-to-head. So the quarters, the 3, 6, 4, 5 matches at 133 should be absolutely fascinating. All right, 41, we go to the trends here. Probably the biggest match here was Vince Cornella took it to Tom Crook, beat him handily, majored him, and then Swiderski lost to Jesse Vasquez. That was an interesting duel, the Iowa State-Arizona State duel. If people missed it, they started at 57, and Iowa State won the first 5, and then Arizona State won the last 5. And Arizona State won most of the close matches. So, I mean, Iowa State won the duel based on bonus, but was another interesting duel on how that stuff goes. Okay, 49. So, Pinheiro, if we go to the trends here, no big movers here, but at 49, Pinheiro loses in overtime to Parco. And I just want to say this, Pinheiro's, I believe, now ranked where he should be. And then that's what happens as stuff goes on. The year before it becomes farther in the rearview mirror and your current body of work is more important. But shout out to him for wrestling because he didn't need to wrestle for Iowa State to win that duel. It was the last match. And Parco wrestled great. Pinheiro was actually up 2 takedowns to none. Then Parco did the get the escape and ride you out. So it kind of ties evens it up. And Parco wins late. Yaya looks really good. You've got the Yanni Gomez. I really think, honestly, like probably at this point, Gomez, you could make an argument, but I'm not going to jump on the soapbox and let Grant laugh at me this week. But there is an argument for Gomez to be number 1 when you're head-to-head, when it's 1 and 2 and you've beaten the number 1 guy head-to-head. I think that's a viable argument.
And that's David, that's something we always talked about when we were doing our rankings. If we have them that close and one guy beat the other guy, and it shouldn't matter that, what you did in the past 2 years, if he just beat you and you're 1, you're 1 and 2 or 2 and 1 or 2 and 3, the guy that just won should be ranked ahead of him. That's what rankings are right now. At this moment in the rankings, you just beat that guy. Right now, you're better than that guy. Not maybe in your history of college wrestling, but in that time frame right now, you're the best guy. So I agree with you.
Yeah, that's good. 57, Holschlag took a loss, so he drops 8 spots. I want to say this the right way because if I say it the wrong way, it's really dumb. All 10 weight classes are really important to how the national tournament team scores turn out. But it feels like 41 and 57, you could have 6 different winners and it wouldn't be shocking. Like, if you like Will Lewan, I think was number 1 at the beginning of the year. Am I right? At least he was 1 in 1 poll, and Brayton Lee is at 12. He was number 1, right? GT, because Nike or Minnesota did that preview, and they were teasing that it was Gable and it was really Brayton Lee, like he's back.
Yeah.
So this weight class is insane because just like we said at 33, like, okay, we don't expect RBY to lose in the quarters to the 8 seed. Well, Peyton Robed Scott would be a fascinating match. Frantic Josh Humphreys is a fascinating match. Like Josh Humphreys Trevor Chumbley in the round of 16 is crazy. Like Brayton Lee, Bryce Andonian is the 512. If you're Bryce Andonian, that's about as bad of a second round draw as you can get if you're ranked number 5 in the country. So I'll start with you, GT. Like when you look at this weight, I'm not going to ask you to try to pick a winner at this point, but I mean, I'm sure you guys have weights like this when you're trying to decide on who your 12 are at NAIs. Do you see a lot of parity at this weight, or do you see one or two guys are at the top and see it differently?
Well, I believe that the national champion for this weight class is pictured here on the screen between 1 and 14. So, I mean, that's about as good as I can.
Yeah.
I mean, once again, I think because of parity, and once again, even at the weight classes that are like super solidified, when you look at like maybe over the tenure of that weight class or whatever, still the national tournament, man. When you go into March and you go into that arena, wild stuff happens that you think about forever. And for this weight class, I think because of how much parity there is, I think will be a huge player in the team score race, as we've discussed previously. Because if Will Luan goes all the way to the finals and Michigan now is maybe bringing home a trophy.
Yes.
Hypothetically or whatever, right? Same thing with Mizzou. Historically, Mizzou has not had, like those other guys step up. Maybe JQ does do that.
Yes.
Just depending upon where he's at in the bracket. I mean, Brayton Lee is still a dog. I think that he's like, and so is, Caden. Like,
yeah.
I mean, he's won whatever it is, like the Southern Scuffle, like what, 3 times in his career?
Yeah.
So like you got some really good talent. And once again, Ed Scott, young up and coming guy, he could make a whole bunch of waves, right? Austin O'Connor, previous national champion. Kendall Coleman's wrestling extremely well. Jared Franick is he's a top 12 guy for the past 2 or 3 years. So, I think that there's a lot going on here at this weight class that has humongous implications, but to your point, there's nobody that could pick this.
Right.
I would love to see Vegas try to come and do this one.
And if you're playing these fantasy contests, this is the weight where you don't you try to pick the number 7 or 6 or 8 or whoever that you think can make the finals. The other interesting thing looking at this, just going down the list in order, Nebraska's Big 10, NDSU is Big 12, Purdue's Big 10, but then 2 ACC schools, and then at number 7 is EIWA. So you could have 3 or 4 different conference champions where like some weights are super stacked in the Big 10 or Big 12. So that's another variance here. So 65, Mark, I think, okay. So the rankings are going to be different next week. Shane Griffith takes a loss to Mikey Caliendo last night. Speaking of North Dakota State beats Stanford, and the rankings come out. So we're on Friday. This happened on Thursday. The rankings from the sources come out on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yep.
And just so people know, when Mark and I did the rankings, Andy Hamilton wanted them by Sunday at midnight. And I believe, if Dana Ostrander is an earshot, Dana, thank you for not for staying married to Mark, even though I tried to kidnap him on multiple Sundays throughout the wrestling season. So the point of that is the Shane Griffith match happened after the data was turned in for all the different ranking sources. So do you see Griffith dropping to 3, to 4, or to 5? I don't see him dropping lower than that.
I'd say he's probably going to drop to 5. If I was doing the rankings, I'd drop him to 5. We had talked about this a little earlier, David. Shane has had a lot of really close matches this year against guys that you would expect him to open a gap on during the match. He hasn't done it. I don't know if it's a weight issue because, you'd heard for, last year or so that he was going to go up a weight. He keeps going back down. I would imagine he still has really good workout partners in the room, but there's not an urgency right now by what the results are showing for him to go out and try to be the best kid in the country. So I think probably 5 makes sense. But Hamidi, man, watching him the last 2 or 3 matches I've watched him wrestle, he is tough. I mean, he just keeps coming at you. So maybe, I don't know, maybe 6.
He's really good. And then you look at how Keegan O'Toole handled him at the All-Star meet. So it just shows there's levels. It does potentially set up, if Griffith were to drop to 4 or lower, David Carr and Quincy Monday would be on the same side of the bracket. I mean, obviously there's a ton of wrestling to be had, but Carr Monday at NCAAs is a match that we've seen before. So that would be fascinating. 174. I don't think there was a lot of changes here. I just want to double check. Oh, well, yeah, there was in the lower half. So not a lot of changes at 74. Mackay missed the duel with Cornell, so he and Foka didn't wrestle. Foka is very quietly moving his way up, and Plott lost to Oregon State. Now, that was Sunday, so that should be in this data. I think it is because Plott was ranked higher. So I'm a guy that looks at past because, like a year ago when Colton Schultz, where he was, by not wrestling Kirk Fleet at the collegiate duels, whether he would have won or lost, he kept himself on the bottom half of the bracket away from Gable. There are certain weight classes where you want to stay away from guys. Starachi feels like he's separated himself from these guys a little bit. So Plott, if he had won that and gone undefeated, and he doesn't have a terribly difficult schedule coming in, he'd have to wrestle Peyton Mako, but he would have probably been on the 2-3 line. Like most likely, because Labriola wouldn't have won his conference, assuming Starachi did. So this really helps Nebraska, really helps Labs, and keeps Mackay on that side. And Foka Plott I'm here for that if that's a 4 or 5 quarterfinal. Don't you think, GT? That's an awesome match, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing too about like maybe not wrestling, whatever it is, like trying to protect your spot within the bracket or whatever, like, I mean, once again, as long as you're getting matches in, I mean, you shouldn't run from competition, in my opinion. But like,
right.
Once again, you got to wrestle, man. You can't just like go and wrestle 3 matches a year or whatever the minimum is and 6 and like protect yourself. Like losses are going to happen. So I think for Plott, he still can make up some ground because once again, there's a lot of matches for these other guys to continue to wrestle if they continue to like step up, right? So.
Yep. It's out of his hands now. He needs other guys to lose to really move up because the only guys really, I think, I don't have their schedule memorized, but at least conference-wise are Romero and Mako, which are below him. Yeah. So
that's what I was going to say, David. There's not a lot of room for him to go, much higher right now, even if he wins out the rest of the year, because he's not going to see any of those other guys now. Those other guys are going to have to lose some matches that they probably shouldn't lose for him to keep moving up the ladder.
Yeah. 84, no big changes. I think the interesting thing here is potential rematches if all the seeds held. If these were the seeds, Brooks, Coleman, Keckheisen, Heidley. Any semi is awesome in NCAAs, but those would be particularly interesting. 97. So this is the other weight that I think. So I like GT's line a lot. Like, I believe somebody on the screen will win. I'm going to scroll this all the way down to 18 so we get a bigger margin of error on who can, if we can take the screen or the field, then I'll get you Rocky, Monacorsi, Max Dean, Younger Bastida, Michael Beard, Truax, Trumbull. So, like, Jacob Warner's had a couple losses. He lost to Bronigal. Ethan Laird had a great win over Dean. Like Zach Bronigal's ranked over Jackson Smith, which again, they're next to each other. And I watched Jackson Smith pin Bronigal in the first period, so I would have that flip-flop. It certainly doesn't matter in terms of who's going to qualify, but it matters who you're going to hit in like the round of 16, the second round. And so many of these guys I feel like are matchup dependent. Like Rocky, I think I shouldn't say figured out, but did a good job against Bastida at the end of the year. Max Dean is really good on top. It'd be fascinating to watch him wrestle a guy like Truax, because most guys who are also good on top don't get rode real hard. Whereas if Max Dean were to wrestle Younger, Younger's done a great job of getting up, but he doesn't really ride to speak of. So this is another weight where if you throw the right dart in a fantasy pick, you're going to do really well. And like we talked about team trophies like Will Lewan, like you mentioned, GT, if Mizzou can be, if they win this, if they're the number 1 seed and they win this and Keegan wins it, that's 45 to 50 points from 2 guys. And they have, I think, 5 other guys that are seeded ranked in that round of 12. If they could punch 2 through, they're probably at least a 4th place team. You have 2 first and 2 6th, 7th, 8th. So this is another weight that's like that. Speaking of one other weight, like there's Zach Elam sitting at 8. There's another guy we're talking about. So not a ton of change here. So Pitzer, that's probably the big one. And this is another weight where like Colton Schultz, if he's the 6th seed at Nationals, that's actually interesting, Mark, because you mentioned Schultz struggles with Cassiope because Cassiope has a lot of the upper body Greco-Roman type stuff to wrestle Schultz and does a good job of riding, where Schultz has done really well against Mason Paris. Like in this drawing, it almost Schultz would be better as the 7 than the 6. I guess I guess I shouldn't say that. That's how you were describing it to me, right?
Yeah. I mean, Cassiope has a Greco background. He'd won Greco at Fargo, I think, twice. He's not going to get pushed around. And that's the problem with these guys. You know, Schultz will lock up on you and, you know, you're not comfortable there, these heavyweights, and they start backing out and then things open up or stalling calls. So you got to be real careful. Schultz is not going to shoot 10 times a match, David. If he's lucky, he'll shoot 1 time through the whole match. And so, yeah, I think that's a good matchup, a better matchup for Tony than him having to wrestle somebody like, you know, Paris or Kirkfleet, because, you know, he struggled with those guys. They attack at the, you know, below the waist or below the knees, and it's harder for him to react like that. So,
yeah, for sure. I completely agree. So a couple of duels to highlight this weekend. I don't know that we'll may have time to make picks, but just want to point a couple things out. And before we do this, GT, you correctly pointed out right before we went on the air, Oregon State broke an attendance record. So shout out to Pendleton, Nate Engel, Road Dog out there. And I think they won 4 matches. They lost the duel, but they won 4, and the big one was obviously a 174 where they won. But what was the number? It was like 4,000 or 6,000, something like that, I think I saw.
I think it was closer to 7.
Okay.
So
awesome for those guys.
After talking with that staff, it was a big moment for their administration and also the Pacific Northwest with a huge attendance. I mean, also humongous shout out to John Smith and the Oklahoma State Cowboys that carry that weight as a program to go to Oregon State, wrestle Pendleton, you know, one of John's guys, one of his favorite athletes of all time. You know, it's really cool to see that Oklahoma State family come together and do some duels against each other, right?
Now, that's really well said, because Coach Smith, you know, I got to visit with him at the Hall of Fame duels, and he's acutely aware of the weight of his program, or the leverage of his program, and to choose to do that to help Oregon State. Like Oregon State coming to Gallagher is one thing, right? You get good matches. It's good for your program. You win 4 matches in that situation. And Oregon State actually placed ahead of Oklahoma State at Nationals last year. The 3 OSUs were right there together: Oregon State, Ohio State, and Oklahoma State. But you're a business guy. I mean, you're a wrestling coach. You wear a bunch of different hats. I feel like I wear several hats. The business side of it, getting 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people in your stadium for 10 matches, getting people excited about wrestling and having a couple clutch wins are a big deal. So shout out to everybody involved in that. So here's the Iowa Northwestern duel, just so people can keep an eye on this. There's some super interesting matches here. 25, DiAugustino, Spencer Lee. 33, Teskey, Chris Cannon. Cannon's a guy that placed last year that's ranked 11th. Yep. You know, Teskey's ranked 12th. So that's interesting. Real Woods, Tal Shahar. I mean, on paper, that's Real Woods. Max Murin, Yaya, probably be another close match. And then Lucas Davison, Cassiope. That's a big difference in wrestling styles. and body styles. So, Mark, I'll let you look at this. Just give me an over-under on how many matches Northwestern wins, because you could argue they don't match up well with Iowa, where Northwestern's good, Iowa's good.
Well, I think a lot of it's going to depend on who wrestles for Iowa, obviously. But, I mean, could I see Chris Cannon beating Teskey? Yes, I could. 41. If Real Woods does not wrestle, Northwestern's a favorite, probably a heavy favorite. Yaya is ranked over Max Muren, but Max has had his number the last few times they've wrestled. So there's 3 matches Northwestern could win. They're favored at 57. There's 4. And then you have the heavyweight match, which is, number 3 and number 4 in the country. They have a good chance of winning 5 matches. I mean, realistically, they do.
Did you just pick Northwestern to win the duel? Is that what you said?
No, I'm just saying they realistically have a good chance of winning 5 matches. So it could be another Iowa-Illinois type of duel coming down to heavyweight. Very close, depending on where they start. I don't think D'Agostino, I haven't seen him wrestle for, I don't remember last time I saw him wrestle before first semester or in first semester. So I don't know if you're going to want to throw him out there against Spencer your first match back. I guess we'll find out. But if they give up 6 points there, it's going to be hard for Northwestern to come back and beat Iowa, period.
Yep, and they had big wins. Illinois had a big win over, oh my gosh, who did they beat? I'll come up with it, but they had a big win over the weekend, and so did let me jump back to it. I'm sorry. So here's Minnesota.
I know Northwestern beat Minnesota last weekend, which was a really big win for
Minnesota, and Illinois beat, I'm trying to think who they beat, but they won a big duel.
Wisconsin, wasn't it?
Yes, Wisconsin. Geez, thank you guys so much. Yeah, and they got a big pin from Danny Pacino. Again, a lot more of these duels are not starting at 25, which is fascinating.
Yep.
So here's the other duel that's pretty interesting on paper. And if you're on this Fantasy Grade website, this is the one they're putting up this week where you can play for free and win prizes. So McKee, Cronin, Berglund, Brock Hardy. So Berglund and Brayton Lee have gone the wrong direction this year for Minnesota. They were both ranked in the top 3. Brock Hardy's gone the right way. Peyton Robb's ranked 1, but if Brayton Lee beat him, it wouldn't be a huge surprise. Sparks, Bubba Wilson is a pretty even matchup. Pinto, Salazar, another even matchup. Foy, Salazar, Red's sort of interesting. I think when I did my picks on this, I had it 5-5. So just another thing for people to keep an eye out on this weekend.
One other thing, David, before you switch this over. Last time Cronin wrestled McKee, Cronin beat him up at Nebraska by 6. Beat him up pretty good. That was a year ago. That was first match of, I think, the previous season, and then Cronin got hurt and ended up having to sit out. But, I mean, he can wrestle with him, so people should watch that match. It's going to be a good one.
CGT, that's why Mark's on the show. You just, literally, that's awesome. I had not remembered that at all. So those are some things to look out for this weekend. And I think the last thing, Pritz is coming on Matt Chat next week. Suriano's back at Sunkist. So maybe next week we'll take a bet on the over-under and how long he stays at Sunkist. But he was the first interview I did on Matt Chat on USA Wrestling's network. It was him, Zahid, and Mark Perry, which Lee put together, which was awesome. Suriano is a really interesting cat to talk to. I think most people know that. He looks at the world a little bit differently. But he is in the handful of people that are at least in the discussion to theoretically be a challenge at 57 kgs. He makes that weight fairly easily. He's obviously a really good wrestler. Zane Richards, I think, jumped levels at the World Cup. GT and I were talking about that. That was fun to watch a guy literally get better right in front of your eyes. So, that weight gets super interesting.
And does RBY go down? Because he says he wants to wrestle.
Well, he can't go up, right?
Yeah, I mean, put RBY going down and Dayton Fix turns it, and then Spencer Lee, obviously. Wow, what a U.S. Open. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and this is the stuff that Gary Abbott wishes we would talk more about all that, all the USA Wrestling stuff, but it makes the 2023 World Championships really important. I talk about this way in advance, but like if you place it, this year was weird because it was Olympics in 21, but counted as 20, and then the 21 Worlds were like, GT would know, I think it was like 9 weeks later, something like that. It was like August and then October. But if you for example, our athletes that medaled in 22, they now sit in Final X till 23. I'm hearing from very reliable sources, there's not going to be all these steps. There's going to be the US Open and Final X. GT's nodding, so that means I'm probably right. That's good.
Yeah, it was just too long of a process last year. Everybody kind of understood that from the top down. So
yeah,
it's a condensed process this year.
27% of the time I'm right 100% of the time. So 3 out of 11. This is one of my 3. So with that being said, like if you're Gilman, if you're Yanni, up and down the line, the 8 medalists we have, they don't have to enter that tournament. And that tournament, oh my God, perfect setup, GT. US Open Vegas. That tournament is going to be so fire because then there's no world team. There's no other step. Like that's it. Like at 57, it's all those guys but Gilman. And at 65, it's all those guys but Yanni. And at 61, it's all those guys, and they just won't wrestle the final. So it's that wrestling. That's going to be awesome to watch. Joe Russell, if you're watching, I want to see with you again, and Bill and James Green. If there's a seat available, I want it. So, all right, boys. Grant, congratulations again. Congratulations to all of the Louisville tournament winners, medalists. Big shout to Grandview and Life for, I think they had men's and women's both finish in the top 3, both those schools, if I'm correct. So go back and watch those if you are interested in especially the women's side and seeing the superstars of tomorrow. It's always good to do this, especially with both the boys back. Marco, say hi to the family in Chicago for me. Yep. And for them, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening.